Well, many people are working from home at the moment on government advice, and yet Parliament itself has long resisted moving out of the Palace of Westminster and letting MPs take their seat from home instead of in the Commons. But is it really logistically possible to put 650 people on a video call, and how would a virtual Parliament work? Well, joining me now is Dr. Ruth Fox of the Hansard Society, who has written about how it might be able to work, and she joins me now. Ruth Fox, nice to see you. So how do you make a virtual Parliament work?
Well, I think the first thing is you don't have to have 650 MPs on a call. As you know from working in and around Westminster, it's only the big set piece events like the budget, sometimes Prime Minister's questions, the Queen's speech, where all the MPs have to cram into the chamber. So best guess is you probably need 100, 120 maximum at any one time. And you can use things like speakers lists to manage the interventions of the MP in a more orderly way. So I think it can happen, and clearly that is what the Speaker is planning with the members of both houses.
But even 100, 150 people is an awful lot to juggle. I mean, there'd be tiny little squares on a screen, wouldn't they?
They would, and clearly that's one of the technological limitations. But as I say, you know, members, we're not going to have debates online in the same way. What we're going to have is effectively is a more interrogatory, a question and answer type approach to proceedings. And I think what you'll see is that members who want to speak will have to give an indication to the Speaker in advance, or using, you know, online chat sessions, and the clerks will have to manage the interventions of members as they go along. So nobody's going to say it's perfect. Of course it's not. But in the circumstances, it's manageable.
Is this, do you think, what's going to happen when MPs are back on the 21st of April? And if so, is it going to be a tailor-made system, or will they be using something like Zoom, or I suppose House Party would probably be more appropriate?
Well, my understanding is that they are using a tailor-made system, working with their technology partners for a tailor-made system, but it will be very, very similar to things like MS Teams, Zoom. Will it happen on the 21st? No. On the 21st, the House has got to reconvene. Not all members. The parties will be managing how many members have to come into Parliament, but they will have to move and pass a motion for how it is that they are going to manage proceedings in the future. So on the 21st, I would expect to see Jacob Rees-Mogg, Valerie Vaz, the shadow leader of the House, debating exactly how it is that they're going to move proceedings online, and a minimal number of members in the chamber to enable that to happen. And I assume that through, you know, discussions and agreement between the parties, they will avoid the need, if possible, to have a vote on it. It will be passed through probably on the nod, so that they can keep the number of MPs down in the House itself.
Yeah, now that's the point, isn't it? Because in the end, what Parliament does is it votes on legislation, or it votes on decisions. And that, time-honoured, is a physical process which literally involves MPs sort of going through a gate, a bit like sheep at dipping time. Is there a way around that? How, you know, if you have to have a vote, and as you say, they'll try and do it on the nod, but if you have to have a vote, how can you do that remotely?
Well, the first question is how much legislation the government thinks it needs to pass through, and therefore that would require divisions. We know the finance bill the second reading of the finance bill will have to be dealt with pretty quickly when Parliament comes back. But beyond that, it's unclear how much legislation the government thinks will be needed, and therefore how many votes will be required. But you could organise the votes in such a way that they could be done online. There is a system at Westminster called deferred divisions, where on certain types of business they vote on a Wednesday, vote by paper ballot system. They could do that online. Other parliaments are doing it. It's not impossible. Security is clearly a big issue, and they have to manage and mitigate the risk. But it is possible to do. But clearly, you want to minimise the number of votes where it's necessary. So, you know, it's really down to the government to give a sense of how many bills and therefore votes they think may be needed.
How much concern do you think is there that all this might end up setting a precedent, and MPs might never get back to the traditional ways of doing business?
Well, I think there is a concern, and clearly that is a worry among some members, and some members are giving an indication that they'd still like to go back to Westminster itself purely for that reason. But I think that can be mitigated. And in our proposals that we produced yesterday with the Constitution Unit at UCL, we made clear that we think that this should be very temporary arrangements, and it should be very clear that these are subject to review, and that they effectively have a sunset clause on them. In the same way that the government has got emergency powers with a sunset clause, these provisions should also have a sunset clause to provide reassurance to those members, and indeed members of the public, who have those worries. But clearly, if there are some positive things that emerge from these necessary changes, then members can reflect afterwards on what aspects of the procedures and the changes to business that they would like to retain. And certainly, changes to the way in which ministers are subject to questioning, whether it's online or whether it's in the House, would not be a bad thing.
Because, of course, there are a lot of people looking on who might say, well, a lot of this tradition, taking 15 minutes to vote, being 2 sword lengths apart, I mean, frankly, it's past its sell-by date, and it's time to modernise the whole thing anyway.
Well, that is, a criticism that many people make, and I think, what we're going to see, we're going to lose a lot of the theatrical aspects of Parliament for the foreseeable future. That's a reality of moving things online. But even if they had moved to electronic voting, as many people wanted in the House, most parliaments have electronic voting actually in the building itself, in the chamber. So even if we had had those reforms, it wouldn't have solved the particular problem that our parliament and other parliaments face now.
Dr. Ruth Fox, nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed.